In this presentation, we will work a problem related to trend percentages. We're going to have our data up top. We're going to use that data to fill out the problem down below in the blue area. We do recommend setting up your worksheets in this format to have the data up top, to have the text in different areas as you have the numbers, that making it easier to reference to the numbers, and that's going to be the most efficient way to go forward. Within our data up top, we've got the years, 2000 X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, X6, X7. We have our income statement and our balance sheet for those years. We're going to use 2000 X1 as the base year to make our trend percentage income statement and balance sheet. So we got multiple years, this being our base year as we move forward. The point of this will help us to basically have a percentage increase or decrease, which could be easier to see in some cases, or a better check than to have just number differences in terms of dollar amounts. So the percentages can help us to make different type of analysis, see trends in another way. And our goal, of course, is to see different trends from multiple types of angles, because that's going to give us a better picture from which to draw information. So we're going to put our information up top. We're going to start with the income statement. I'm going to do this with formulas. I'm just going to pull down the data. So I'm going to say this equals, we're going to go to the sales, and then what I'm going to do is autofill down, and it'll fill in the rest of the text. So I'm going to say enter, and then we'll put our cursor on that cell, and then I'm simply going to autofill it down, and it should just have the relative references to autofill all the way down, like so. So there we have it. So now our text is there. You could copy and paste it, or some other format if you choose to do that as well. So now we're going to go to 2000. We'll start with 2000 X7, the latest year. What we want to do is have a comparison between 2000 X7 as 2000 X1. We'll compare everything back to 2000 X1, that giving us an analysis of a percentages as of the base year. In this case, 2000 X1, which we just basically chose. You can choose the base year in somewhat arbitrary form. You need a base year, then we're going to reference everything back to it. So then it's all in percentages as a relation to that base year. So to do that, we're going to say that this equals, and we're going to scroll up top, and we'll pick up the 1453 and divide that. So we got B2 divided by the base year, the 755 in H2. So it's going to be B2 divided by H2 and enter. So there we have it. And so what we're saying here is, of course, sales in 2000 X7 is 192.5% of sales as they were in the base year. And we'll do that same comparison in 2016 or 2000 X6, X5, X4 back to the base year as well. And then we'll have ratios that are all applied to the similar base year. So we can do this for the cost of goods sold. This equals, I'm going to scroll back up top. We're going to pick up the cost of goods sold for 2000 X7. Here's the formula up top. We're going to divide. So now we've divided by, and then we're going to pick up 2000 X1 and enter. So there we have it once again. We're going to do it again. We're going to say this equals in gross profit. Scrolling back up, we're going to pick the 408 in gross profit and divide that by the 2000 X1 gross profit and enter. And then we'll do it again. We'll say this equals in the operating expenses, the 311, and we're going to say divided by, and then the 117 in 2000 X1 and enter. And then one last time, we're going to say this equals in net income, the 97 divided by, so here's B6 divided by the 195 and enter. So there's going to be our information. Now we could have auto-filled that down. So note that if I double click on this first one, we have relative formulas. If I just autofill that down, it should work. So let's try that now. We're going to say if I delete these, then I can simply autofill by putting my cursor on this one, on the autofill handle, left click, dragging it down, and we get to our same information. I double check that by clicking the last one typically and saying, is it doing what I expect it to do? Yeah, it's taking B6, the 96 divided by the 2000 X1, and that's what we expect. So now we're going to go do the same thing to 2000 X6. So we're going to say this equals, scrolling back up, the 1273 sales divided by back to the base year 755 and enter. So we'll do this all the way down again. This equals, and we'll scroll back up. We're going to pick up the cost of goods sold, 850, divided by the base year, 443, and enter. And we'll do this again. This equals, in the gross profit, scrolling up, the 423 divided by the 312, and enter. And now we're on the operating expenses, equals, and scrolling up, the 243 divided by the 117, and enter. And then the net income, finally, we're going to say equals, and the net income, the 180 divided by the 195, and enter. And so again, we could have auto-filled that down just to show. We can say delete these, put our cursor on the top item, autofill box, left clicking, holding down, scrolling down, auto-filling down, double checking the last one to see if it does what we expect it to do. Looks like it is, looks good. Now we're going to do the same thing for 2000 X5, and this time I'll use the autofill. So we're going to say this equals, and we're going to scroll up and pick up the 2000 X5 sales divided by the 2000 X1 base year, and then we'll simply autofill that down and double check it. So we'll autofill that down, double check. If I double click on here, we're going to say that looks about right. Gross profit's picking up the right numbers. Now we might say, could I autofill this way? What if I was to autofill this way? So and then it doesn't do it. Why? Because if I go up, it moved the base year. I don't want it to move the base year. So if we want to basically move the other way, if I want to autofill across to these years, what we would have to do is absolute reference the second cell. So the base year is in H2. So if I go to H2, absolute reference, you can click F4, or you can put a $sign before the H and before the 2, and then enter. Now I can autofill this way. If I autofill this way, it should work. So if I double click and check it, 2000 X3 over, that looks good. This way, that looks good. Now note, if you do a absolute reference, you will no longer be able to autofill it down, because now you have an absolute reference. You could use a mixed reference in order to populate this whole table, but I'm not going to get too much into the mixed references here. I don't want to overcomplicate things because we're mainly focusing on the accounting of it. But so we'll do the same thing here with an absolute reference. So I'll double click on it. We're going to say, all right, absolute reference, this cell, I don't want it to change. I want to move this cell over as we autofill to the right. This one needs to stay the same. So I'm going to go here and say F4, $sign before the H and the 3, and enter. Then we can go back on it and autofill across. And then if we were to double click on, say, 2000 X3, there we have it. Looks like it's good. Enter. And then we're going to go to the next one and say, okay, double click on it, scrolling back up. The second item here is we don't want it to move. So we're going to put our cursor on it and say F4. And then that'll put a $sign. Whoop. Let's say, put our cursor on it and say F4. And that'll put a $sign before the H and 4. And you could just put a $sign before the H and 4 as well. Just type it in there. And then we'll autofill that across and double check it. I'll double check the 2000 X2 this time. This one divided by that one looks good. And then we'll do this again. Double click on this one. We want H to stay the same. So I'll put our cursor in H and F4. So $sign before the H and 5, and enter. Put our cursor back on it, autofill that across. So there we have that item, and one more. Double clicking on it, we want to absolute reference this second one. So we'll say F4, $sign before the H and 6, enter. Put our cursor on it, autofill it across, and that's what we need. So now we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the balance sheet. And note, as you go through this now, what we're saying here is obviously the 2000 X1 is 100% of itself, because we're comparing everything to that year. And then as we move up, we're comparing 2000 X2 to 2000 X1. So you can see 2000 X2 is 122% of that base year. X3 is 131% of the base year, not of X2, of the base year. We see a nice trend of it increasing in 2000 X4 to 140. We see a nice trend increasing in 2000 X5, 2000 X6, and 2000 and X7, all comparison or in terms of or relation to the 2000x1 numbers. Now we're going to do the same thing for the balance sheet. So first thing I'm going to do is just copy the references for the words down. So we're going to say, okay, these are the accounts, let's say, equals the words, the accounts. So we'll say equals, and we'll scroll back up, and we want to pick up the assets, and then enter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter, and then I'm going to autofill it all down, and it'll pick up the relative references, which in this case, of course, have the words in it, the accounts in them. So we'll say, okay, there that is, and then we're going to autofill that down. So I'm going to put my cursor here, autofill that down. Now note, as we autofill, I'm going to let go. It changed the cell format so that it's the same as the first cell. Now, if I want to copy the formatting, I can do that easily up top by copying this formatting. It'll make it white. So so bear with me. We'll do a couple steps here. I'm going to highlight this entire thing, and I'm going to say I want to copy that formatting now. Now you could just copy this whole thing, the words, but I have formulas in there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to format paint this, Home tab, Clipboard. We're going to do the Format Painter. And so we got the Format Painter. I'm going to paintbrush then. I'm just going to click on this top cell where the assets are, and it'll format everything down that I had highlighted. And now we want to make it blue so it matches the blue. So I'm going to right click on it, or we could go up here to the Home tab, Font, and the Paint bucket. If you don't have the blue right there, you can go to the More Colors, and you can go to the Standard, and then go to the blue. That's the one, this one right there, and OK. So there's a couple ways you could do that. You could have just copied. You can also copy this whole thing if you would like. Copy it, and then when you paste it, we can right click and copy. When you paste it, however, paste it of just the 1, 2, 3 values, and that way it won't make it turn white. So that might be even easier than what we did. Okay, so now we're going to do the same process that we did before, this time with the balance sheet accounts, comparing everything to the base year, this being the base year of 2000 and X1. So cash, we're going to say that this equals, scrolling up top, we're going to pick up the 122, divide that by the base year, the 182, and enter. So there we have that one. We can do this all the way down for the first one. This equals the accounts receivable. We're going to pick up the 880, divided by the base year, the 378, and enter. Merchandise inventory, we're going to say this equals, scrolling back up, the merchandise divided by the base year merchandise, and enter. Then we have the other current assets, and that's going to be equal to, and we'll scroll back up, and we're going to pick up the 82 and divide that by the 36 and enter. Then we're in the long-term investments equals, and we'll scroll up, the 0 divided by the 251 and enter. And then we're on the plant assets, and that's going to be equal to, and we'll scroll back up. We're going to pick up the 3894 and divide that by the 1509 and enter. Then the total assets, we're going to say that that equals, and scroll back up, and we're going to pick up the 8161 divided by the 3300 and enter. And then we're on the current liabilities equals, and we'll scroll back up, and we'll pick up the 2051 divided by the 498 and enter. Long-term liabilities, we're going to say this equals, and we're going to pick up the 2192 divided by the 716 and enter. Then we're going to say the common stock equals, and we'll scroll back up, and we'll pick up the 1485 divided by the 1155 and enter. The other paid in capital equals, scrolling back up, the 371 divided by the 289 and enter. And then we've got the retained earnings is equal to the 2062 divided by the 642 and enter. And one more time, we're going to say the total liabilities and equity is equal to the 8161 divided by the 3300. All right, so let's do this again, and this time we'll use the autofill. This will be a little bit easier, so we'll go through this again. Notice that the process is pretty much the same here, so we're doing this a little bit quickly, but the process is, everything's going to be going back to the base year here. So we're going to say, all right, this is going to be equal 2000 and X6, the 162 divided by the 182 and enter. And then we'll autofill that all the way down. So I'm going to say, put our cursor on that item, autofill it, autofill handle all the way down. and that should pick up. Now notice we have a cell here because this is going to be liabilities and equity subtitle. So I'm just going to delete that, and then we'll double click on any of them and say, does that do what we think it should? Looks like it. It's picking up the 2000 X6 and comparing it to the base year. So that looks good. So I'm going to say, okay, let's do that 2 more times and we'll try a different method. So this equals, and we'll go back up top, and we are in 2000 X5. We're going to pick the 168 divided by the 182 and enter. And then we'll autofill that down. We'll put our cursor on it, autofill handle, we'll drag that down. So there we have that one. We'll delete this item, double check it. I'll pick a cell, retained earnings, and just double check it. Looks like retained earnings is doing what we would expect. Let's do this one more time. We're going to put our cursor in 2000 X4 equals, and we'll scroll back up. We're going to pick up the 172 divided by the 182 and enter. Put our cursor on that item and then autofill it down. Then we're going to delete this cell, and we'll double check the plant assets this time. Let's go back up. Plant assets look to be calculating correctly. So now we're going to try to autofill the other way. So we'll autofill this way across. We can double click on this item. And remember, when we do this, we want the H to stay the same. So to do that, we're going to absolute reference the second cell. So this second cell, I'm going to put my cursor on it and say F4 and then enter. And then I can autofill across. So then I can autofill across this way, and it should pick up what we want. Now note, again, you can't autofill down once you've done that because we used an absolute reference. So, and then I'll double click on this. Looks like it does what we want. Let's do that a couple more times. Double click this second one in H. I'm going to put my cursor on that in F4 to put a $ before the H and 11. And then we'll autofill that across. And double click on one of them, and it looks like it does what we want. So okay, one more time, double click on it, H12. So we'll put our cursor in the H12, F4, enter, put our cursor on that, autofill it across. So there we have that. All right. Next thing we're going to do is try a different method to complete this. Now I'm going to actually delete the whole thing and show you a method that basically we could pick up all those numbers, and that's going to be a mixed reference. So I'm actually going to delete the whole thing. You could choose to keep going the way we're going, or you can delete the whole thing like this. And we're going to say, all right, is there a way that I can take this cell, autofill it all the way across for the whole thing? Because in essence, if I double click on this, we're going to say that hey, this is all coming from the same table. What I'd like is to autofill the whole thing across, but when I go to the right, this cell right here is going to move over to I, and we don't want it to do that. So we don't want it to go right, but we do want it to go down when we relative reference down. So in other words, we want the H to stay the same for this particular reference, for this cell, but we want these items to change, the numbers to change. So instead of an absolute reference, we're going to use a mixed reference. So to do that, you could click F4 a couple times, F4, F4, until you get the $ in front of the H. So in other words, you want the $ before the H, that's the one we want to freeze, not before the 10, that's the one we want to be able to move. That's called a mixed reference, and the $ just means to keep one steady, keep one constant, don't change that one. And then if we say enter, then we should be able to copy this across. Now you're going to have to go one way, so I can go this way first, and then I could double click on it and say, does that do what we want? It looks right. And then we should be able to highlight this whole thing and copy it down. So we'll autofill it down with the fill handle all the way down, and it should populate the whole thing. Now this whole thing, I'm just going to delete because it's not useful to us. And then if we double click on something to double check it, we can say, does that do what it looks about right? Right, we could double click on a couple of these, common stock. Looks like it's picking up what we think it should. So that mixed reference is one way we can do this much faster. And again, the idea is the same thing. We're saying, all right, here's the 2000 X1, here's 2000 X2 compared to X1, here's 2000 X3 and compared to X1, 2004 compared to X1, and so on. All right, so then what we're going to do is also we can make a chart of this if we so choose. So let's just make a quick chart of this. to do that, all we have to do is and we might want to actually unbold these items just to make sure that Excel doesn't confuse the headers with the data. So sometimes I'll go in here and I'll say, let's go to the Home tab font and unbold this. And then Excel won't confuse the fact that I want these to be the header information and this to be the data information. And then I'm going to select the headers and the data. So we got the headers and the data from cell A26 to H31. We're going to go to Insert, and then we'll go to the Charts area, and we're going to go to this item with an Insert Line or Area Chart. And then we'll go to this first one, and this is going to be the line chart. So we'll select that item. Now I'm not going to get into too much on the detailing. Here, what did I do? I'm going to move this so we can see the data. And this is one way that we can create a nice little chart on this. Here's going to be our percentages. Here's our years. Now note, of course, that our chart's a little bit reversed than we might normally see, because you might expect the oldest year to be here, 2000X1. We would have to reverse the data, have 2000X1 first to 2000X7, and then we would see the rise that you would expect, right? So we're kind of reading this backwards. So if we picked up something like the sales line, here's sales, that blue line, and then you could see it basically rising as we go from 2000X1 in a percentage basis. So it's 192.5% here as we get to sales up top. Unfortunately, of course, the cost of goods sold are rising at a faster rate, meaning net income is going down as a percentage of 2000 and X1 numbers. So that's one way we could chart this. Again, if we wanted to make the chart going the other way, because you typically would see it reading it from left to right to the oldest year here backwards, we could just simply reformat our table here, put in 2000 X1 to X7, and reformat the chart so that it would be flowing the other way. So it is possible to see this pretty easily, this data with charts, and be able to create those charts within Excel fairly quickly as well.